My brother was a real jerk growing up. I liked animals a lot, and a lot of times, just to spite me, he would always be an asshole to animals. I once had a cat, and he would take it and throw it into the laundry dryer and turn it on for a minute. Then he would open the door and the cat would bolt out of it. He would also put it into a bucket and hold it in there and hang the bucket from a tree branch. Then he would pull the tree branch down and launch the cat into the air like a catapult. The poor cat would do several somersaults in the air before luckily landing on its feet and running away. He would do all of this dreadful stuff and then just laugh at me when I cried and tried to get him to stop. The worst thing my brother ever did to an animal happened one late summer night. Our parents were out of town and my brother was watching me and our other brother. As much of a jerk as he was, he did let us stay up late, and that was pretty nice. We had a nice house in the country, and it was nice to stay up late in the summer. On the first night that my parents were away, around midnight, we heard this barking and growling out in our front yard. Obviously some dog was out there. I looked out the window and saw a ragged husky standing right off our front porch. The poor thing looked like it had been through hell. It was dirty and had patches of hair missing in places, and it may have been sick. We ignored it for the most part because dogs in the yard were not an unusual thing. Eventually, it left. The following night, close to around midnight, again, we heard the dog barking again. When I looked out the window, it was the same old husky. It was odd that the dog had come back around the same time, but we didn't really give it too much mind. Again, dogs in the yard were not an unusual thing. After a while, it left. We heard the dog barking again around midnight the following night. As I had done the nights before, I checked out the window and saw the husky that I had seen each time. I told my brother that I was a bit scared that this dog kept coming back. Well, telling him that was my mistake. Letting my brother know you're scared is never a smart thing to do. He began making fun of me, teasing me that the dog was going to get into the house and get me. He occasionally would go to open the door to pretend that he was letting the dog into the house. My other brother and I would cringe and scream for him to close the door again. He would, but our fear just made him tease us even more. At one point that night, my brother grabbed my cat and tormented me by grabbing it and threatening to throw the kitty out the door so the dog could kill it. While I was crying and begging him to stop, he was teasing me and he opened up the door just a little bit. He was shocked to see that dog, a ragged-looking husky, was right at the door. It began barking loud when my brother opened the door and it startled him. The cat freaked and clawed the hell out of my brother's hand, got loose and immediately ran in the opposite direction. My brother was obviously pissed off, but he couldn't take it out on the cat. He decided to take it out on the dog. The most traumatizing thing I ever experienced in my life happened next. My brother ran into our parents' room and grabbed my dad's shotgun. We begged him not to, but his hand was bleeding from being clawed and he was angry. He took the gun and went outside, slamming the door in our faces. Then right in front of our eyes, as we looked out the window, we saw our brother shoot and kill that husky with the shotgun, while my other brother and I screamed and cried. My brother then came back in and dragged us both out in the dark with him. He made us grab shovels and we had to go and bury the dead husky. It was terrible. The shotgun blast had tore the poor thing to shreds, and it was traumatizing to see an animal looking like that. It was past midnight and hot outside, and we lived way out in the country. We were both in shock from what we had seen, and here we were digging a grave for a poor husky who hadn't done anything wrong other than come into our yard. It took close to 2 hours, but we finally got the dog buried rather deep. The next day was hell for my younger brother and me. My older brother just brushed off the entire incident as if it were nothing. I had never really known anyone to care so little for the life of an innocent creature than my brother did for that husky. After a dreadful day, we were trying to watch some movies later that night to get our minds off what had happened. When midnight approached, I heard the scariest thing I had ever heard in my life. I heard the exact same bark as we had heard the past 3 nights, and it was right out on our front yard. My older brother looked really shocked, but it was nothing compared to how he looked when he got up and looked out the living room window. My brother turned completely white and his jaw fell open. I moved to get up to look out the window with him, but he told me to sit down. He actually closed the drapes and ran over to the front door and locked it. Then he came back over to the couch and sat down with the two of us. He kept looking at the window until the barking eventually stopped. That was the last night that we ever heard the barking. My brother dug up the grave of the husky but never told us whether the dog was still buried or not. I'm not 100% sure what really happened that night, but I will tell you one thing. I have never seen my older brother be cruel to an animal since.
The woman in the attic. When I was 12, my dad got a really good new job, and we found a new house in a really nice area of town. It was the first time we ever moved, so it was a bit of an adjustment for me, even though it was in the same town and I didn't have to change schools. One thing that helped was that I really liked the house. It was a brick building that had 3 floors and an attic. It was also enormous and obviously very old. The doors to all the rooms were wooden and had actual keyholes. I had never seen actual keyholes except in cartoons. The floors were old hardwood that creaked when they were walked upon. This house was like nothing I'd ever seen before. It didn't take long for me to explore the entire house. It had a lot of extra rooms in it, and my mom had plans on using them for various things, like a study and a sewing room. It even had a library, which was pretty cool because I loved books. A few months after we had settled into the house, while we were eating dinner one night, my older brother said something really interesting. He told my mom that there was an old woman up in the attic. "Stop trying to scare your little brother," my mom told him. He insisted that he was not trying to scare me. My mom didn't believe him though, because he was always trying to scare me. When my brother continued to insist, my dad put his foot down and told him to stop. My brother would never defy my father, so he stopped, but I could tell he was very displeased. The following day, my brother had gotten home from school before I did. Both of our parents were at work, so we were home alone. When I was in my bedroom and changing out of my school clothes, my brother came in to talk to me. He told me he wasn't trying to scare me the previous night. I told him I believed him, although I really didn't. He then asked me if I wanted to go up into the attic and see the old woman. I declined, telling him that I had a lot of homework to do. He then proceeded to tease me, as big brothers tend to do, calling me a chicken and such. I eventually gave in, and he and I went on our way. The entrance to the attic was on the 3rd floor of the house. It was a steep staircase that led up to an old door. I had been in there a few times since we had moved in and really had no problem with it. I could understand how it could have been scary, but I always just thought it was just as cool as the rest of the house was. But being with my brother and knowing that he was going to try to scare me when we got up there, the door looked a little foreboding. My brother was walking in front of me, so I thought for a moment that he might have been sincere and not trying to scare me. If he was trying to frighten me, it made more sense that he'd walk behind me and grab me at the opportune moment. He opened up the door and the two of us walked into the attic, with him going first. The attic itself was a bit ominous. It was a large area that didn't have any drywall up, just bare insulation. But it was huge and full of all sorts of things that my parents had put up there after we had moved in. My brother pointed over to a Christmas tree that was sitting in the corner in the room. It wasn't our tree and must have been left over from the previous owners. I assumed he was pointing towards that tree because that was where he had seen the old woman. Despite the fact that I was still expecting something from him, something to frighten me like a jump scare, I leaned forward and squinted to get a closer look. While I was looking, I heard the attic door shut behind me. Angry that I had fallen for the trick from my brother, I turned around and saw him standing away from the door, true fear in his eyes. He was looking at that tree, so I turned around and looked at it again. Standing right behind the tree and looking at us through the bare branches was what looked like an old woman peering at me through the branches. I began to back up towards the door even though I knew it was not going to do me any good. As I did, I saw the woman reach forward, and with her scrawny and bony hands, she moved the branches of the tree. She reached out, and with the other hand, she began beckoning me to come closer. As she stared and motioned towards me, she opened her mouth and tons of maggots began pouring out of her mouth while she made an awful moaning noise. I am not too proud to tell you that I screamed like Jamie Lee Curtis and turned and ran to the door. Although it had slammed shut, I was happy to know that the horror movie cliché of a slammed door becoming inexplicably locked did not apply here. I opened the damn door and me and my brother ran out of that attic. I told my parents what had happened later, but they never believed me. They thought that it was my brother taunting me that influenced my imagination. As far as I'm aware, they never experienced it. I had to go back in the attic at later points in my life, but thank God I never saw that woman again. But I will never forget that image, and neither will my brother.
I recently went up to Racine, Wisconsin to visit a friend. Although it had been a really long time before I actually lived in Racine in the mid-1990s, I hadn't been back since I left in 1996, so I thought I would check out some of the old places I had been to. One place that I was very interested in was the Cousin's Sub Sandwich Shop that I had worked at for nearly the entire time I lived there. When I went to the Racine Mall area, I was upset to see that the restaurant had been demolished. I got the job back when I was 19 years old. I was fortunate enough to get a good 9-to-5 shift, Monday through Friday. Being 19 years old, I thought that working a regular 40-hour-a-week job, even if it was at a sub sandwich shop, was pretty good. The restaurant never really got busy until around 11 a.m., and it stayed busy until around 2 p.m. But from 2 p.m. until I left at 5 p.m., the place was rather dead. The part-time employees that were only there for the lunch rush went home, and it was only me and 3 other people in the building until the evening crew began coming in at 4:30 p.m. The reason I bring all of this up is to give you an idea of how isolated it seemed. After 2 p.m., the manager went into her office to do paperwork. The other 2 employees went into the back room, one to slice meat and the other to cook bread. And I would always stay out behind the counter to take the occasional order, but I would get so bored just standing there that I began to go out into the dining room to clean. The dining room was huge and painted a very dark blue color. There was a smoking area that was set furthest away from the counter that was down a few steps. Although it was set lower, I would still have a clear view of the whole dining room while I was down there cleaning. About a month after I began working there, I was cleaning when I could have sworn I heard someone whisper my nickname into my ear. Jack. I looked up from the table I was cleaning to look around. No one else was in the dining room with me. I figured it must have been my imagination, so I went back to cleaning. No more than a minute later, I heard it again, and it sounded like someone was behind me and whispered in my ear, "Jack." I spun around, expecting to see someone there, but there was no one behind me. By this point, I was beginning to feel very apprehensive about being in the dining room by myself. I wasn't sure if I could be imagining it or what. But each time I went back to wiping up the tables, less than a minute would pass before I heard someone whisper in my ear, "Jack." While after having this happen over and over again, I just couldn't remain in the dining room any longer. I took my towel, and while carefully watching all around me to see if anyone was around or would be following me, I made my way back behind the counter. When I closed the door and walked by the office, the manager noticed that I looked rather shaken up. She came out of the office and asked me if something was wrong. Looking up at her, I replied, "The weirdest thing keeps happening to me out in the dining room." The manager smiled before I had a chance to go on. She asked me, "You're hearing someone whispering your name in your ear, aren't you? It happens all the time here. We've just accepted that the place is haunted, but it's pretty harmless. Don't let it creep you out too much, John." I couldn't chalk it up to someone in the store playing a trick on me, though you see, Jack was the nickname everyone called me in high school, and I never used it at work. I always used my real name, John. I hadn't even told the people I work with that my nickname was Jack. But for some reason, whatever that was whispering to me in the dining room of that sub-restaurant, it knew that my nickname was Jack. How did it know?
Spending the night. This isn't a long story, but it is easily the scariest thing that has ever happened to me in my entire life. When I was a younger child, I was deathly afraid of the typical things: monsters in the closet or hiding under my bed. I would always have to check both of them before going to sleep, and it became a routine. I would go over and open the closet door, have a look around, and then close and latch the door. Afterwards, I would go over and kneel down in front of my bed and peer under it. After I confirmed that there was nothing under there, I would go turn off the light and then hurry over to my bed, which was placed up against the wall, and keep myself up against the wall until I fell asleep. I always felt silly in the morning and promised myself that I would not do it the next night. But regardless, when the next night rolled around, there I would be, checking in the closet and then under my bed, before turning off the light and laying against the wall. I was about 11 years old when, for the first time, I had a friend spend the night. My parents had a weird rule that we couldn't have friends stay overnight until we reached the age of 11. I don't know why. But anyway, my friend Kevin and I watched some scary movies after my parents went to bed. When we were done, we went into my room. He had a big sleeping bag on the floor that was right around my bed. It was a sleepover, so we weren't really planning on going to sleep right away. We just laid down and started chatting. As I was laying on my bed and he in his bag, he suddenly got up and went over and turned out the light. Actually felt a jolt go through me because I hadn't expected him to do that. As Kevin got back in his bag and we continued to chat, I found that doing so became somewhat strained. For the first time I could remember, I was in my room, and in the dark, without having checked either the closet or under the bed for intruders. And the fact that we had both watched scary movies really didn't help. While we laid in the dark talking, Kevin seemed to realize that I was somewhat tense as we talked. He made some bad gay joke that I was scared he was going to make a move on me, and we both laughed a little bit. I tried to relax for a while, and we kept chatting, but it wasn't long before Kevin had drifted off and stopped responding. Laying there awake and somewhat alone was a bit frightening. I tried to close my eyes and just go to sleep, but it was too difficult. I knew I just had to do my routine or I wouldn't be getting any sleep that night. I couldn't turn the light on without Kevin waking up, but I had a little book light on my nightstand, so I grabbed it. I then listened to Kevin's snores as I got up off the bed. Very lightly, I crept over to the closet, making as little noise as I could. I turned the doorknob very slowly until I heard it click. Then, opening it up a little bit, I shone the booklight into it and confirmed that it was indeed empty. I then closed the door and made my way back to the bed. I crawled up onto the bed because I figured that I could just lean over and peer under it. I took the light and slowly looked over the side. I switched on the book light and found myself looking straight into the eyes of a little boy hiding under my bed. I jumped really quick and dropped the book light on the floor. Kevin came out from under the bed, laughing his butt off at me. Crawling out from under the bed, he told me he was sorry, but he couldn't resist when he woke up and saw me checking out the closet. He had to try and scare me. I appreciated that. That's what male friends do to each other. Still, I asked him to turn on the light for me so I could calm down a little bit. He got up and went over to the light and flipped it on. When Kevin looked at me, though, he turned as white as a sheet. I followed his gaze, which was towards the foot of my bed, and saw what had scared him. A little girl about our age was standing at the foot of the bed, wearing a nightgown and holding a teddy bear. The worst part was, she didn't have a face. She was quiet for a moment, and then said, "I like to play." And then she was just gone. Kevin stood there for a moment before asking, "Can I sleep in your bed tonight?" "Yes," was my only response.
I woke up in the middle of the night, but wasn't sure why. Not only do I work 12-hour shifts during the day, which really wear me out, but I am one of those really deep sleepers. Even when my alarm clock wakes me up, it takes me a little while to realize that it's indeed my alarm clock and it's waking me up for work. Even then, I have a really hard time shaking the grogginess. After a few moments, I realized that my daughter was standing on the side of my bed trying to wake me up. I fumbled around for my glasses but couldn't find them. She kept pulling on my shirt sleeve and I gave up on finding them. My wife was out of town, so I had the whole bed to myself and had somehow rolled all of the way over onto the other side of the bed and would have been lucky to find them with how exhausted I was. I gave up and just asked my daughter what was wrong. "There's a ghost in my room," she told me, the fear evident in her voice. Now, if my wife had been home, she would have let the girl climb into bed with us. I, however, really didn't like that. Kids have to get over being scared of the dark, and that's not going to happen if parents continue to baby them and indulge their fantasies about ghosts and monsters. "Honey, there's no such thing as ghost," I told her. "You need to go back to bed because Daddy has work in the morning and you can't go to school all tired." "But Daddy," she protested, "there really is a ghost in my room. I swear there is." I groaned. I didn't believe in this sort of nonsense, and I wasn't happy that my daughter was obviously believing in it. I rolled over and managed to pull myself up to a seating position. "Sweetheart, there's no such thing as ghost," I assured her. "Whatever is in your room, it's just in your imagination. Now you need to go back to bed." My daughter stopped for a moment and seemed to be thinking about what I said to her. "Okay, Daddy," she replied. "Could you at least check out my room for me to make sure?" It wasn't the sort of thing I like to do, but it really seemed to be the best way for me to be able to go back to sleep. "If I check your room out, will you go back to sleep?" "I promise," she told me. I got up out of bed and I followed my daughter out of my room and into the hallway. I felt like I was drunk as I was walking down the hallway. I was so exhausted that I kept teetering back and forth. The one thing I knew was that when I got back to bed, I would not have any problem falling back to sleep. When we got to the room, my daughter jumped into bed and got under the blankets. "Check in the closet, Daddy," she told me. Slowly, I made my way over to the closet, grabbing the door. I rolled it slowly open and looked in it. Of course, there was nothing there. I let my daughter know this, and she seemed very pleased. "Will you check under the bed for me too, Daddy?" she asked me. "Will you go right to bed after I do?" I asked her. "I will, I promise," she responded. Staggering over to my daughter's bed, I grabbed the side of the bed frame to steady myself. When I had the leverage I needed, I lowered myself down, pulling back the blankets. I peeked under the bed. Much like I had expected, there was nothing under the bed. I was about to straighten myself back up when my groggy head cleared up, and suddenly I realized something. My daughter had gone with my wife to visit her parents, and I was in the house alone. I felt like my heart stopped. As I wondered then what was on the bed, I quickly jumped up to my feet, and there was absolutely no one on the bed. Nervous now, and just a little bit scared, I jumped away from the bed. It was like I half expected something to reach out and grab my leg. Shakily, I made my way back to my bedroom. I turned the lights on because I will admit I was a bit scared. I repeated the routine I had done in my daughter's room. I checked under my bed and in the closet, and I slept with the light on. When my wife got home, I told her what had happened, and she actually got a pretty good chuckle out of it. Now, whenever my daughter comes into my room claiming a ghost or a monster in her room, I let her crawl into bed with me.
The laundry room. During my first year in the dorms, I lived on the top floor of a 10-story dormitory. The laundry room for that building was all the way in the basement. I hated going up and down the elevator over and over again just to switch my laundry over and then return to my room. So whenever I had laundry to do, I would just take my calculus book with me down to the laundry room and I would study while I was doing my clothes. There was nothing remotely scary about the dorm laundry room. Although it was a basement room with no windows, it was large and very brightly lit. It was quite busy during the day though, so I tended to choose to do my laundry in the middle of the night. There were rarely any students down there that late, and the few that were would only come down there to put their stuff in, switch it out, take it out, or leave. The nighttime in the laundry room was a bit of an untapped study resource. Before a big calculus test in the fall semester of my freshman year, I was down in the laundry room. I was washing some clothes and trying to study for the exam. I hadn't been bugged by any other students, and it was nearly 2:30 in the morning. As I was studying, I heard this odd thumping noise. I looked up from my textbook and scanned the room, trying to find the source of the noise. By the time I had fully pulled my attention away from my book, however, the noise had stopped. I went back to reading, and no more than 5 minutes later, I heard the thumping sound again. It again stopped when I looked up. I was aggravated, so I stood up and began looking around the room to see if anyone else was doing laundry. I noticed that there was one other drying machine that was going. I just figured that the person must have been washing their shoes or something, so after shaking my head in annoyance, I went back to work. The thumping sound came and went for the next 20 minutes. I did my best to ignore it, though. About 5 minutes after the last noise, which coincided with the end of the drying cycle, a student came down to get his laundry. I shot him a few dirty looks, but I didn't mention anything about drying his shoes in the laundry. About 5 minutes after he left, I heard the thumping noise again. I was really weirded out because it meant I must have been wrong about that student. It had to be something else making that noise. Well, I still had my test the next day, so I did my best to ignore it. After about 5 minutes, though, I realized it was not going to stop, and I was not going to get any work done. I got up and went over to the dryer to see how much time I had left on my cycle. I was washing my comforter, which is why I'd been down there for so long. It took a good 90 minutes to dry the thing after I'd washed it. I noticed that it had 10 minutes left on it, and I sighed in relief because I knew I could go back to my room soon. As I turned to walk away, I noticed that the thumping noise seemed to be coming from my dryer. I was confused because I only put the comforter in the drying machine and there was nothing in it or on it that should be making a thumping noise. I became very irritated because if someone had put something into my machine as a joke, I would have to wash the damn comforter out again, and then I would never get out of that basement. I kneeled in front of the dryer and was about to open the door, when through the glass door of the dryer, I saw what was undoubtedly a severed human head bouncing around against the window and walls of the dryer. It rolled up the side of the walls of the dryer and fell forward, its dead eyes looking straight at me. I reacted freaked and disturbed, not only that there was a human head flopping around in the dryer, but the thing was in there mucking my comforter up. I grabbed the door, pulled it open, and quickly pulled the comforter out of the dryer. It got on the floor, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get it away from the head. I knew I would have to wash it again anyway. Then I looked into the dryer, but there was no human head in there. I started looking through my comforter and on the floor, but there was no human head there either. I knew I saw it, though. I had to wash my comforter again, but I was too shaken up to stay in the laundry room while I did it. The next day I told my dorm mate about the experience, and he laughed at me. He said that was a well-known story on campus, and he thought I was just trying to scare him. I insisted that I had seen it, and when he finally believed me, he told me he was envious because he wanted to see a ghost too. I assured him he really didn't. Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. I want to give a few shoutouts in regards to this video. First, I have to thank Joey's Nightmares for not only conceiving of this idea, but working to put it together. This was my first collaboration, and I think it worked out pretty well. It was a pleasure to work with Joey, and if you haven't checked out his channel yet, as usual, I highly recommend that you do. I've included a link here and in the description for the video. Secondly, the spectacular thumbnail was created by CosmicInk. And finally, I really hope I pronounced this correctly, and please do not be mad at me if I don't, but the music in this video was done by Doblado Studios. I have included a link to their YouTube channel next to the orange cat and in the description for this video. So if I pronounce the name incorrectly, at least maybe I'll steer some traffic in the direction so the name can be corrected. Now, on a personal note, while Joey and I were working on this video, my channel surpassed 3,000 subscribers. I just want to take some time to thank everyone who has subscribed. I got a big thrill when I reached 100 subscribers and was shocked that so many people would want to listen to me. So you can imagine how 30 times that is overwhelming for me. I hope you know I appreciate it very, very much. Now in the future, due to the incredible response to my winter video, my next video will be 3 more scary stories that take place in winter. That will be out this weekend, Friday or Saturday. Then I will be working with Blue Spooky on a collaboration of scary camping stories, and that should be out sometime early next week. So in closing, all I have left to say is, you can check in the closet, and you can check under the bed, but it won't matter, because when you're lying in bed in the dark, you're never truly alone.